we still need to integrate Indian manufacturing into global value chains.
The biggest challenge is really being able to integrate India into the global supply chain.
And as far as also the technologies, personally would like to invest into a lot of R&D and now ancillary to create the whole ecosystem to make manufacturing cost effective.
So GST has been a game changer from an Indian economy perspective. The complexity still remains high.
Indian manufacturing needs to become much more competitive because it will be able to satisfy the global value chains.
Welcome everyone to this very special budget discussion. As India approaches Budget 2026, the economy stands at a critical inflection point. Growth is no longer just an exception, it's about efficiency, resilience, and global relevance. Whether it is manufacturing, trade, infrastructure, finance, technology, the common thread is execution. How well India can move goods, data, capital, and ideas across boundaries and across states. This year's budget comes at a crucial point when global supply chains are being reconfigured, geopolitics is reshaping trade routes, and competitiveness is increasingly defined by speed, reliability, and cost efficiency. For India, the opportunity is clear, but so are the challenges. Infrastructure gap persists, and policy predictability is under sharper global scrutiny than ever before. We have a distinguished set of panel members today. We have Mr. Dilip Sawhney, Managing Director, Rockwell Automation India Private Limited, Anupam Bansal, Executive Director, Liberty Shoes Ltd, Naveen Aggarwal, Office Managing Partner, Delhi NCR KPMG in India, and Mr. Bipin, Sapra, Partner in Indirect Tax, Policy Leader, EY India. Thank you all for joining us today. And coming to you, Dilip, first, let me start off with the first question. India's manufacturing challenge is not just about scale alone. It's about productivity, repeatability, and this is where India's ambition of becoming a manufacturing hub comes in. How critical is industrial automation to improving productivity and quality? And what role should Budget 2026 play in accelerating automation adoption?
Pranit, first of all, thanks for having us here. It's a very, very important consideration, and the reason is the following. Right? India's biggest challenge as we look ahead is really going to be about, can the economy create the next 100 million jobs, right? And these jobs need skills, right? Now, let's just unpack this objective a little bit, right? First of all, if you have to create jobs at that scale, I don't think there are as many avenues that are as appealing as manufacturing is, right? Manufacturing really has to be the lead actor in this movie, meaning job creation. So one is that. But at the same time, jobs aren't just going to happen just because we wish for them to happen. It's going to happen because manufacturing becomes competitive, right? And at that scale, it has to be competitive at a national level, and I would argue that it needs to be competitive even despite all the global reconfigurations, if you want to call it that, happening. We still need to integrate Indian manufacturing into global value chains. Now, if you have to solve the competitiveness challenge, and if you have to solve the scale challenge, Indian manufacturing needs to become much more competitive, because it will be able to differentiate itself not just through cheap labor, but also through high quality products which can satisfy the global value chains in terms of traceability, quality, and increasingly sustainability related insights that are required. Now, all of this, for it to happen, you need to have good at-scale adoption of digital and industrial automation. So it is linked to India's competitiveness. It is linked to India's ability to then, if it is competitive, we will be able to generate, manufacturing will grow, and growth fixes a lot of problems.
So do you think the era of cheap labor and being competitive only in that factor, is that over now?
I think it's the starting point. I mean, access to labor, having that India is one of the few labor surplus countries. We all know that, right? So that is an advantage. But in and of itself, that advantage is not enough for us to scale manufacturing, is what I'm trying to argue.
Right, I get it. Naveen, coming to you, Dilip says manufacturing is the lead actor. So so that probably means that it's manufacturing is not just about the output target. It's also about as he mentioned system level competitiveness and the challenges around that. So India has made considerable progress in manufacturing. I think auto is one sector we've seen do very well. But beyond these few sectors, export competitiveness still remains a challenge for us. What are these structural gaps, do you think, that limits Indian manufacturing and export? And can the budget 2026 iron these gaps?
Thank you so much, Pran. And let me first paint the picture. I think we have come a long way as far as moving up manufacturing as a percentage of GDP. So we're now roughly between 15 to 17%. Clearly, the government has an ambitious target of taking it up to 25% by 2047. And if you look at it over the last 5-6 years, a number of tangible steps have been taken. So, of course, we brought in a concessional tax rate for new manufacturing that had a sunset of 31st March 2024. We brought in the production-linked incentive schemes that have had mixed response. They've come in the initial batch, and then there are new schemes that have come in. And there is obviously the National Manufacturing Mission the government announced in the budget last year. So all of that is really to drive manufacturing. But if you look at it in the current context, there are still certain inherent challenges. Most of our manufacturing is largely in the finished goods space. We're still not being able to do component level manufacturing. And therefore, the biggest challenge is really being able to, as was mentioned by Deepak, it's really about how we integrate India into the global supply chain. So that's an important factor. The second factor is really around the fact that the last mile connectivity is still not there. And therefore, if you're looking at building, it's not just about building strong infrastructure, it's also about connecting the ports to the factories and building freight efficient solutions. So that's the second part that needs to be addressed. Third, I believe, is that we are still facing some challenges, industry is facing challenges in terms of financing. Exporters are under stress from a financing standpoint, and therefore this budget can offer some relief to exporters, either in terms of the export guarantees that are there. There could be some expansion in that, interest subvention for technology adoption. So these are some measures that can be given to provide some sort of a relief. And I think this is an opportune time for the government to rethink that if we really want to be a manufacturing destination, we want to move in that direction, we should look at setting up manufacturing clusters. And manufacturing clusters would mean that the entire ecosystem needs to come together, which drives manufacturing, which would include companies that are driving the entire supply chain, which include vendors, OEMs, MSMEs. They all come together and drives connectivity in a wholesome way. And finally, I would say that it's probably a good time to rethink whether the phase out that happened of the corporate tax exemption that was, the lower corporate tax rate that was there of 15%, if not reinstated in a full context, but can it at least be reinstated for certain priority sectors where we want to drive manufacturing? So all of this, I think, will help soothe the nerves a little bit for the export community and help improve the manufacturing index.
On the part of clusters, we already have existing clusters which have been around for quite some time. Do you think we need a better design when it comes to these clusters now?
Well, I think what's happened is that maybe it's complementing with what we're doing on the PLI front, because the PLI scheme has worked well. It's worked well in certain sectors. For instance, we spoke about EVs and automotives. We've talked about there is a benefit in the electronic space and the mobile space, to some extent in the pharma space. But if you look at the white goods, we look at the industrial goods, I think there's more that needs to be done, textiles for that matter. So I think it's about opportunity to make this cluster system a lot more robust, and also look at how we look at incentives. This whole incentive is very targeted to individual companies. We now need to look at industrial clusters, industrial parks. The incentives have to be much more focused around companies that build in that direction, because that brings the whole entire ecosystem together. It brings down cost and helps drive competitiveness. So I think just not looking at clusters, but also looking at the whole incentive package in terms of PLI 2.0, which is not just driven in terms of looking at driving incentives which are linked to volumes or linked to output, but maybe it's time to reorient that towards companies that are investing in R&D, in technology, in patents. That's the new ecosystem that we need to drive to make the clusters more meaningful.
Right. So Naveen mentioned about the textile segment. There is another segment which is very crucial in terms of manufacturing is India's leather sector, and India has the largest ecosystem and the largest leather ecosystem in the world. But somewhere I feel there is a missed opportunity. That's in the terms that our exports continue to be modest. What are the structural gaps, Anupam, that holds this industry back, and what should Budget 2026 really do? We've seen in the news that there is a talk about a $1 billion package. We don't know the contours of it. We don't even know if it's going to work out. But beyond that, what should the budget do?
Thank you, Pran, for getting me to have such an interesting discussion. So definitely $1 billion package is something which we just read about a day before, and it's a great initiative. Some of the structural issues which really Indian footwear industry focuses, where we spoke about, the labor, the raw material component, the automation. So let me talk about this in the footwear aspect. So while the availability of labor is always there, but at the same time, on one side we talk about unemployment, but the other side, factories need labor, skilled labor, but you don't have high productivity or people really wanting to work on those bases because of certain schemes. They just go back to their villages during times on Manrega or now whatever the new schemes are called. So their whole focus to really make that as a future, to say that they have to really work hard and no freebies are allowed, I think that's an important part. Productivity and skill development, while government is doing a lot, but are really people taking those skill jobs and applying them to the job is something which we really need to really see. When we spoke about the cluster development, I think two gap areas. While footwear clusters are developed, but there's a big lack of ancillaries which are there and innovation hubs. Still, for a lot of raw materials, we still need to go out to China because the availability of raw materials is still a big concern, and enough has not been done to develop the component industry. And as far as also the technology is concerned, that's an area, and Liberty personally would like to invest into a lot of R&D and now ancillary ourselves to create the whole ecosystem to make manufacturing cost effective. And definitely the way we spoke about infrastructure, where footwear clusters are mainly developed in North India, which are not really connected with any of the ports. I think the south one, which is for footwear near Chennai, is still connected, and I think there is a large few industries which are coming there. But as far as north is concerned, because India becomes like a whole country, or I would say each state becomes like a country. So still the north-based factories are still not so well connected with ports, and internal infrastructure cost is quite high. Government is doing a lot, and I think we still need to do a lot more to boost the budget. Really looking at expectations from budget, definitely support needs to be provided for industries to develop ancillary technology and better labor reforms to change the whole ecosystem so that people don't get scared in hiring the right people, and for them to make conducive environment for both the people to grow together.
Right. And how big are you on automation?
See, and in automation per se, as far as the front end is concerned or the technology is concerned, but if you talk about the real manufacturing, footwear is still, I would say, very labor intensive, and while automation keeps on happening in all the places, but for India to be really, really cost effective at this point of time, labor is something which we can't really ignore. I would like to proudly say that we are one of the most technologically advanced factory, while larger footwear industry is not so automated, but the real cost, why they are able to do at a lower cost is because they have not automated so much, and where Liberty is slightly more always at a high cost because we have automated so much. So I think we need to make the right balance, because what market is willing to pay for the quality and the price what we are looking at, and I think the whole ecosystem needs to be developed. So I would say in footwear industry, while automation is important, but still I think the larger labor reforms at this point of time would do a better trick than investing into more automation at this point of time.
Interesting. Mrs. Sapra, coming to you, while GST doesn't fall, directly under the ambit of the budget, and we've seen some form of stabilization since 2017, it still remains largely complex, especially for SMEs. What can be some of the simplification measures that the budget 2026 can provide, maybe in terms of a roadmap or something like that?
So GST has been, I think, a game changer, at least from an Indian economy perspective. It's a huge positive change which happened in 2017. And given our federal economy, the expectations for it to succeed were low. Yet it has done very well. The complexity still remains high, but what it has done a lot is it has brought the entire certainty to taxation from a perspective of what the center and state does. We have much less cascading and a lot of other things which we have talked about in the past as to what a GST has done. In the last 1 year, we have seen GST 2.0 come in, where rate rationalizations have happened, and the geopolitics has played a big role in trying to get India into a more competitive phase. And GST 2.0 was something which the government had been thinking for a long time. I think the time was just the right time to reduce the rate structure. The 4-5 rate structure was hugely skewed, where it was just taken from the earlier regime. So this GST 2.0 is much smaller. We have two rates, effectively 5 and 18. The gap still remains high. There are challenges which are still there for even for goods which have been brought into the 5% regime, and I think that's the next stage of rationalization which the government will have to look at when it comes to the credit side of things, because of difference in the rates of the essential goods which are being produced, which are mostly at 5% now. The capital goods continue to be at 18%, the services continue to be at 18%, and a lot of inputs still remain at 18%. What has it done is that there is accumulation, there is a potential accumulation of credit as we go along. And that's something which you have to realize that something which is being imported from outside, though it will continue, there will be a levy of the same amount of GST, they would never have that sort of an accumulation and costs which would come in. So the next stage of simplification should be around credits, and in the longer term look at the rates, the two rate structure which is there, can it be brought nearer so that these anomalies get sorted out. Credits are a huge issue which we see in terms of what is available as credit, the cascading, the costs which are there which get inbuilt. That needs to be rationalized as to what credits can be taken, what cannot be taken, and the best practices which are there globally should be brought in. We are looking at audits and litigation which has become quite high. It's given the complexity of the law that has increased substantially in the past few years. The government is seized of the matter, and the next set of reforms would be around streamlining audits, the multiple investigations, multiple litigations which are happening, and much more litigation than it should be. Each company does face litigation on account of various issues. So those need to be really sorted out, and generally there needs to be a decriminalization of the whole GST law. It's still too premature to think. There have been cases of outright evasion, and those need to be dealt with very severely, but only on very strictly to those areas only where there is an outright evasion. So a lot of areas still in GST which require streamlining. We'll not see them in the budget, but I think the GST Council meetings which will happen around that, and maybe we can, given that the last change happened on 15th of August, which the Honorable Prime Minister talked about from the ramparts of the Red Fort. We can see a outline coming by the Finance Minister in this budget when we see. But she'll look at customs duty definitely.
Also, would you want to see a timeline in terms of aspects like petroleum still being out of GST? I think almost 10 years into GST now. Don't you think at least there should be some form of timeline that,
I think it's a question which everyone is asking. The entire petroleum sector, there has been a thought around getting it into the GST regime. We talked about the lowest hanging fruit of ATF to be brought in. There were debates, but the states haven't really fell in place. What GST 2.0 has done is that the whole focus has shifted to revenues. And this sector gives states their revenues from VAT and whatever else they have. So revenue is becoming a big issue which they need to really deal with to be able to bring this sector into the. It's an absolute need because there's a huge cascading. This is something which is almost 45 to 50% of the sector which is not being taxed, and accordingly the rates which can be rationalized much better still remain away. But you're right. There needs to be a vision. There needs to be a date. But we'll have to see how it goes.
Right. Coming back to you, Dilip, digital manufacturing industry 4.0, that's a global norm now. It's talked about across conferences, it's talked about in the boardrooms. How ready is Indian industry when it comes to adoption? And how can budget help Indian manufacturers towards smart factories? We've heard him speak about the fact that he is into automation, but that probably increases his cost a little bit more compared to others. Maybe in terms of quality he's far higher, but it does push up his costs as well. What are some of the things that budget can do?
Sure. So first part of your question, you spoke about how ready is Indian industry for digitization and advanced manufacturing. I would say if your attitude, if your point of view is to be where the puck is going to be, right, you have to see where manufacturing globally is going to be, right? If our integration into the global value chains today is less than 2%, and we are already the top 4 economy in the world, aspiring to be in top 3 in the near future, right? So we have to be thinking somewhere around making ourselves, if we want to be treated as the global manufacturing powerhouse, we have to integrate ourselves better. That's one thing which I'm trying to lay some emphasis on. The second thing is the current state of the state, right, it's a full spectrum. There are firms in India that are global lighthouses, right, in terms of their digital adoption. And we have 3-digit number of firms, that already are, meaning they're best in class, they're globally referenceable, right? But then that's not representative of the sector as a whole, right? Some industries have a higher adoption just because the innate nature of those industries. Automotive, for example, it's a global sector, and it is such a competitive sector that you cannot be competitive if you do not do what your global peers are doing. So there's a higher degree of adoption. And automotive as a sector also has, the chain leaders have a lot of influence over the ecosystem, meaning the tier 1s, tier 2s, and tier 3s. So consequently, they exert their influence, and the adoption of automation and advanced manufacturing diffuses a lot through the manufacturing ecosystem. On the other hand, sectors which are again important for Indian manufacturing, life sciences, pharmaceuticals, for example, right? India is a pharmacy to the world, right? Regulations demand higher adoption of automation because you need to have electronic audits and traceability is really very, very critical, right? So that is one of the key driving factors, right? I keep coming back to adoption of automation, not for the sake of automation itself, but for the results that it can produce for the industry, right? Which is what? Which is better, more tight to compliance from a quality perspective, product, right? The other thing is from a again, efficiency perspective, manufacturing is one of the biggest users of energy, right? Energy for some industries ends up being one of the leading contributors, as far as the cost of goods sold is concerned, right? So if you have good control over where energy is getting utilized, your ability to then mitigate or optimize, right, increases significantly, right? So it again goes in terms of making you much more sustainable and also much more competitive, right? In terms of what the budget can do, and I want to go back to a couple of points that Naveen spoke about, right? India's manufacturing really is in its MSMEs, right? I think it's a large contributor, large generator of jobs, right? I think a very high percentage of Indian exports already are coming out of the MSMEs.
About 40%.
45%, right? Now, you cannot engage with MSMEs on a firm-by-firm basis. You have to engage with them, in terms of manufacturing clusters, which is where they reside, right? And that makes it a lot more easier. I think budget can do quite a lot over there. I think the last year's budget, that's where the National Manufacturing Mission came out of, right? And I thought that was a pretty bold step, government putting its money, so to say, where its mouth is, right? And since then, we've seen a lot of policy support. Niti Aayog, for example, put out the roadmap for advanced manufacturing, right, which I thought was carrying forward that agenda. This year's budget should pay attention towards how can that be actualized? How can we implement it at scale in India, where you have several million firms that make up the manufacturing sector, right? So, and the other thing, which Naveen was alluding to was in terms of providing incentives, right? Now, MSMEs, just by their very nature, they don't have access to the resources which larger firms have, right? They don't have big IT departments. They don't have CTOs that can help them support. So where is that support going to come from? Who is going to help them mitigate the risk of adoption of new technologies? And I think clusters and cluster-based engagement, that gives you a means by which industry policymakers can come in and create infrastructure which has shared resources, including shared digital infrastructure, right? If you're talking about advanced manufacturing, you're talking about adoption of not just digital technologies, but also physical technologies like robotics, etc. Right? Now, how do you get an MSME that is barely even introduced to any level of automation into robotics? Right? Is robotics even meaningful in their context? Where are these questions going to get answered? If you have shared infrastructure within the clusters, a whole lot of that experimentation can happen over there, so that they can go back and implement what is appropriate for them with confidence, right? And I think that makes a lot of impact. The other thing is, we have to really incentivize, and you have to incentivize, right? Incentivize on outcomes, not incentivizing, are you buying a certain technology or not? That really doesn't mean much. Incentivize on outcomes. Have you improved your productivity? Have you been able to, if you're talking about integration with global value chains, how many accreditations with global chain leaders were you able to achieve? Every one such recognition means India's ability to integrate itself better into the global value chains goes up. Those are the kind of outcomes that we need to be incentivizing. So,
like a PLI for a technology adoption.
Technology adoption, but you're incentivizing outcomes as opposed to incentivizing, purchase of certain technology.
India earlier had something like a TUFS, the technology upgradation scheme. I don't think that is there any longer.
I think some sectors like textiles, etc., probably still might be having.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but you're saying just upgradation might incentive for upgradation may not really work, is it?
Are we talking about adoption of technology just for the sake of adoption alone, or are we talking about technology producing outcomes? I argue in favor of technology producing outcomes, right? And those outcomes, because you're deploying digital technology that scale, it's much more easily auditable. For example, what these technologies in the context of Indian MSMEs have already been proven to do is record keeping in manufacturing is very important, right? And record keeping used to be pen and paper. That means nothing to a large firm. They can always be made to suit the expectations, right? On the other hand, if you have electronic logbooks, which have high integrity, right, where date and time stamps and the data capturing is all of carries certain trust, right? Very easy to implement now at the scale of an MSME firm, right? I'm just citing one example. What it does is it allows you to then be able to produce with confidence the outcomes that you've been able to produce with that technology. And I think we should be out, supporting those outcomes, as opposed to if you're just saying, a small firm, with a few crores of turnover, has to not only deploy technology, but also meet with all the compliance norms because they've consumed some, government subsidy or incentives, that adds to their compliance burden. Here you're talking about if you're incentivizing outcomes such as what PLI did, right? It actually is producing the right kind of results. That's what my belief is.
Right. Naveen, let me come to you, and I'll stay probably, with the PLI part of it. I wanted to test the hypothesis of, long-term durability of manufacturing and how probably, is the best way to achieve that. Is it time maybe to, recalibrate from incentives to enablers, okay? PLI has been great in terms of attracting investment, but are we, overemphasizing and, are we running the risk of betting too much on an incentive-led scheme for manufacturing? And how can, Budget 2026 make this a little bit more beyond just incentives so that, you move from subsidies to, sustainable competitiveness?
I think you raise a very valid point, and I think I would agree that the next wave of growth of India's manufacturing story is not just going to be about subsidies and incentives. It is really about how Indian factories are able to integrate themselves into the global value chain. I think that's really what success will mean like. And therefore, PLI scheme to some extent has moved the needle in terms of the incentives that were given. It was given with a clear purpose that we want to drive manufacturing in certain sectors. Certain amount was allocated. But I think, using a single yardstick, which is basically capital investment and sales or volumes, is not the only decisive factor. If we really want to be competitive, we really have to move into more qualitative attributes. I think technology, Dilip mentioned, was an important attribute. And as I mentioned earlier, it has to be done not individually. It has to be done in a more holistic manner for the entire ecosystem, for the sectors that we want to drive, and therefore clustering could be one basis. But I think, as you rightly mentioned, this is about sustainability. This is about building competitiveness. And competitiveness comes around how you measure what the effectiveness of that is. And that effectiveness can be measured in terms of technology. It can be measured in terms of the IP that gets created, the IP that not only gets created but gets monetized for the rest of the world, because we are not just making for India. We're making for the rest of the world, right? That narrative has changed some time back. And therefore, we also need to look at sustainability. So to what extent let's say, even if you look at data centers, and I know we'll talk about data centers, but that's another sphere in which infrastructure is being developed, right? With so much technology being deployed, India being one of the largest consumers of data, right? How do you incentivize that sphere in a holistic manner? And for that, you need to, again, look at renewable energy as an alternative source of energy. And therefore, whether it's in the context of PLI schemes, in any form, we have to look at how energy is being used more efficiently, and that could be built into one of the yardsticks on which one would look at the effectiveness. So technology, IP, patents, adoption, and so there should be some sort of a scorecard which is more holistic. But at the end of the day, India has to become a component player. It can't just be a finished good player. And for India to be a component player, I think there are some other issues that need to be addressed. Most importantly is an issue that we have in custom duty, right? We have the issue of inverted duty structure. That is a big challenge today. Honestly, if you look at it in the mobile phone space itself, why is it that we are not able to bring value addition in India, right? Why is the value addition sitting outside India? Because the components and parts that are getting imported into India are attracting a custom duty which is ranging between 5 and 25%. But you import the entire equipment, that is, there is no custom duty on that. So that creates an anomaly, and therefore that leads to value addition shifting outside India where it should be in India. Similarly, in terms of also if you look at other raw materials being imported or intermediate goods being imported, that also have a high tariff rate at this point of time, and that needs to be brought down because you need to reduce the landed cost of goods. So I'm just not looking at PLI scheme in isolation. I think several things need to be done to make sure that India becomes a true global player in making India play out in the global ecosystem, and that can be done through a more sort of a different version of a PLI scheme that needs to come into effect, and also look at sectors where we've not been able to be successful. I mean, textile is one of them, but if you look at white goods, you look at other forms of hard goods that need to be manufactured. I think all of that will help in moving up the needle as far as manufacturing is concerned. So I think that definitely requires a relook.
Right. So let me come to Anupam and the conversation now, probably for every business during lunch, breakfast, dinner, whatever it might be, is about tariffs. Tariffs can make or break industry or a sector at the moment. How bad or good or okay is it for your sector and the tariffs and the trade policy? What is the kind of impact that you're seeing, and what would you want the budget to do for your sector?
Okay, so I think I would like to add a point before that from the various conversations I've heard. I think what we should really expect from the budget is how do we increase the disposable income and increase the consumption right now, because what is important is manufacturing can always keep on scaling with technology and subsidies and everything, but I think what India needs is a consumption story, and I think the real consumption brings scale automatically. So I think what we should really expect from the budget is consumption. So also automatically the point will get addressed is tariffs really impact the export business. At the end of the day, if there's a great amount of domestic consumption, the scale automatically comes in, and then automatically, I don't think so anybody from the large company like us or a small company is holding on to any investment in technology. If there's a consumption available, if there's a scale which we see, that becomes like a peanut cost to adopt. Today we are not adopting because you feel that there's no need to increase the production because we don't see the consumption. So I think the main focus India should look at is how do we increase consumption. And when we increase consumption, and I think that mindset has changed in last couple of years, and further change needs to happen is how people in India starts appreciating Indian goods. At the end of the day, we are not looking at Chinese-made Ganesha. We are looking at Indian craftsmen making Ganesha. Or I'm not trying to say that we create a global disadvantage. At the same time, the pride in consuming Indian products, and there is enough production available, and that can be made at lower cost in India. Let's look at how we can trigger Indian consumption and Indian scale. I think that automatically takes care of the growth of the economy and the scale. The moment we get into the scale, automatically the cost comes and we become globally competitive. The second part I was looking at from the technology side, most of the technology companies are coming from abroad. Are we doing Indian technology company? Like most of the people are doing digital marketing through the Western companies. They're using ERPs which are Western. Look at the amount of outflow which is happening. What is India doing to make it Indianized in that context and make it cheaper so that the problem is solved at a grassroots level rather than saying technology karo, and then we end up creating a more imbalance of the foreign trade rather than creating a more inbuilt ecosystem. Coming to tariffs, definitely a lot of Indian companies were focusing on US exports, and Indian tariffs has created a big dent, and almost 30-40% of production which was idly would have gone. It's definitely a problem which needs to be addressed, and I'm sure the geopolitical system is working towards addressing it, and I'm not trying to say that short-term or long-term measures should not be taken for that, but I think the problem needs to be solved in holistic sense so that the global system is forced to take consumption from India rather than the tariffs play an important role in. So the moment we have the great innovation, the moment we have great cost, and not so much dependency on the export in that sense, probably the ecosystem will work better than forced ecosystem of maybe a short-term subsidy for a year or two. How does it really help? I'm sure it is required at a short-term perspective for sure, but we need to solve the long-term issue as well.
Long-term issue. We've been coming to you, and I would stay with GST. And when I go through the monthly data that comes in, GST collection seems robust, and it seems good, growing at a steady pace. But there is wide divergence when it comes to collections. The trends that we've seen is states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka. These are large manufacturing states. There the GST revenues have been growing in single digits, and this has been observed through several months now. The GST registration data also, it indicates higher number of registration, but does not directly correlate to significantly higher revenues. So what's happening with taxes and economic growth? When we're talking about manufacturing going up, these are the states which really matter.
Absolutely. And I was listening to this conversation, just wanted to give my 2 bit also. I think the whole manufacturing thing has been talked about. We are talking about, as Anupam said, make in India for the world, and everybody is working towards it, whether it's the tariff structure or the GST. Everybody has been trying to push that. I think what needs to be done is to look at each sector. Anupam talked about components. What is component for one, maybe in final product for another, or the intermediary. We need to look at holistically a sector. Like in case of semiconductors, we have given it a 360-degree push, and at some point of time during this year and coming year, we'll see a huge push which will really change the Indian market in a big way. Similarly, mobile phones, PLI was a huge success. Huge success in the sense of outputs. We need value to come in here. That will happen at some point of time. But I think we need to look at the sectors and the products so that we can really give a boost to the manufacturing for that. And there would be a lot of things required, customs, GST, income tax, the regulatory framework for that area. So that's my 2 bit here. Coming back to the GST collections, I think even before the GST 2.0 was really launched, the states, the big states, the manufacturing states have been seeing single-digit growths which have been there, and a lot of it is to do with what is being manufactured and what is being consumed within that state. You'll see states like UP where the growth has been tremendous. UP used to be number 10 out there in the list of the states of GST collections. Couple of months back, it was number 4. It's moving to 2nd or 3rd. So there have been states where the growths have been in double digits also. And 14% has generally been the benchmark on which we really measure as to how a state is performing. I think a lot of it is to do with what is being manufactured there and how it is being used to incentivize manufacturing in those states. That is making a lot of difference. Registrations have definitely gone up because I think the GST administration itself has really cracked down on the whole concept. But the structure of credits And one, you have to realize that the overall GST growth hasn't been really in the last 3 to 4 months. It has been below 10% only. If you really look at since the GST 2.0, it has been between 7 to 9%. That's how the rates have been. And I think at some point of time it will grow, maybe in another couple of months as the rates settle down, as credits, as I talked about, is a huge issue where a lot of credit accumulations are happening, which are there. And output side rates are being reduced for pharmaceutical is Maharashtra is a huge place where pharmaceuticals are being manufactured or textiles are being manufactured. All of them have moved to a 5% rate. A lot of credit accumulated from past that is going impact. So a lot of reasons out there, and mainly to do with the make of manufacturing. UP on the other hand has nascent industries. They are bringing out manufacturing clusters of electronics and other things where defense, a lot of that is being pushed into. So it's how the structure of manufacturing is, and services. I think it's much more diffused. We tend to see services automation everywhere, which is happening. So I would say that state-wise, it's more intrinsic to what is being manufactured in that state. And
okay, great. Dilip, coming to you, one aspect of automation and with AI now is the loss of jobs, and that's real because we've seen some anecdotal evidences as well. On the other hand, you mentioned as well, especially for an SMB who does not have a large IT firm, IT department, automation itself is a challenge. You put a plant which is automated, who runs it? Who do you call? In that sense, when it comes to skill-based interventions, what can the budget do to, make sure that automation happens and skilling of people also happens? We have a large skilling, program. Is that in tune?
Yeah. So first of all, we got to take a very clear-eyed view on what these technologies are going to be doing. I mean, undoubtedly, there is going to be a transformation as far as the landscape of jobs is concerned, right? I've been in the automation industry for over 3 decades now, and this question has always been around, believe it or not, right? Is automation going to be taking away jobs? And I'll argue to you, to look ahead, you've got to look in the rearview mirror, right? Did automation eat up all the jobs, or did it create the new sort of suite of jobs? I would argue that it's going to be the latter. It's going to create a whole new category of jobs in new industries which are not even in existence right now. Leave aside those job descriptions themselves. Here's how that is going to happen. First and foremost, you need these technologies to deal with enormous amount of complexity that already exists in manufacturing, right? This complexity is going to become even more significant, more severe as supply chains reconfigure, get disrupted, get reformed. Anupam spoke about tariffs and the impact they're having on where you would end up either producing or shipping or exporting your goods to, right? And when that happens, it isn't that you're going to put it on especially when it comes to engineering products, you're not sending it just to country A versus country B. Country B may be having a whole different set of standards and regulations that you would need to comply with, right? So that has an enormous impact backwards. Where I'm trying to take the conversation to is these technologies, aided by AI, would enable manufacturers to deal with this complexity, not just become victims of it, but actually be able to overcome and thrive in this very uncertain global environment that we are finding ourselves in right now. The other thing is, how would jobs evolve, right? Let's just take a look at it. We're talking about creating jobs for the next generation of workers who are coming in, right? And we've come from being an economy which was on the lower rung of top 10 in the world to, right now we are, number 4 going to number 3, right? We are talking about a whole new expanding manufacturing landscape, right? Bringing new set of workers in that do not have any of the experience that the previous generation of workers used to have, right? How do you skill them fast enough? AI has a role to play in that, meaning in creating, aiding the skills-based initiative for workers at scale, point number 1. Point number 2 is the ability for, an operator, either working on a cell or working, on a line, that operator from being someone who's doing the work to being an operator that is supervising work which is being aided by all of these advanced manufacturing techniques and technologies that we are talking about. That's the transformation that I'm talking about. If you believe that AI is transforming our lives, why would you not want to believe that it's going to happen in manufacturing as well? I would argue that one of the most understated aspects of value unlock, as far as the impact of AI is concerned, is actually in manufacturing. AI is essentially all about data and harnessing the power of data. Manufacturing is well recognized now to be amongst the top 3 creators of data that is out there, right after financial markets and probably entertainment and social media. It's manufacturing, right? And today we are tapping barely about 1% to 2% of the value of that data globally. India would be probably even lower than that, right? So there's enormous amount of intelligence to be gathered, which will make manufacturing much more capable and, I'll argue, competitive, right? If you're able to harness that value. Now, once you're able to get those insights, get those analytics, what do you do with them, right? So you need those models which will work at the edge, right? Allow you to give you decision support not for CEOs that sit in the corporate offices, but decision support for people who are to deal with, production processes, right? So there is enormous amount of value to be unlocked over there. And a nation that is looking at, becoming the next manufacturing powerhouse cannot let go of that opportunity, right? So you need it basically to attract the next set of workers because they don't have the skills which the previous generation of manufacturing workers had, right? Neither do they look at manufacturing as a very attractive employment option. That could be easily changed if it is manufacturing that is very contemporary and future-facing, right? And then for India to be thinking about, where it wants to be as the top 3 economy in the world, right, is to look at this automation to autonomy shift that is happening globally now as far as manufacturing is concerned, right? So it's all about value unlock. It's about how these technologies can aid your national agenda, right, which is to become a top 3 economy and eventually a developed nation in the next couple of decades.
Very interesting. Anupam, how difficult or easy is it for you to find skilled talent, especially people who know new automation or the skills needed to just operate maybe a different type of a machine altogether? How easy, difficult is it?
So I would say it is a challenge. So while a lot of technologies are developed, and if they are not trained, so if you feel that such trained manpower is readily available and you ask for a resume and the person is ready, I don't think so that exists. And I think the technology, at the pace it is evolving and it is changing, it requires huge amount of time and effort to adopt it to people ecosystem. Like we ourselves feel that we are technologically quite advanced, but when it comes to the talent to consume it, so if I was to take an example of just the training module which we spoke about, and we created a good training module through AI to be given to all the salesmen, but if they are able to use it as effectively the way we want to, I don't think so. It is the skill and will both, which is a challenge. And in India, everybody feels they're an expert, but do they really want to become an absolute expert? So it's something like there is a skilled doctor, but there is a hakim in everybody. So you like to take a medicine just by saying, "Ye mere ko pata hai." So it's that adoption and as a culture will take its own time, and I think we really need to train and be consistent with it.
Interesting. Naveen, coming to in school and college when we studied economics, there was a set way, and we were taught how global trade happens. Global trade does not happen like that now. What's India's strategic trade posture then? With tariffs, trade barriers, industrial policies increasingly looking inward, what should India do to navigate these turbulent times so that our competitiveness is protected and we also do not look inward?
So whole global narrative has fundamentally changed. What we always understood was tariff was an economic tool. Now it is being used as a political weapon. And therefore, it's opportune, and India is rightfully doing that it's not creating walls. It's actually creating an environment which is much more open, stable, diverse, resilient, and really making sure that we are future-proofing our business and therefore encouraging. And that's the mindset that we want to go in with, right? So I think what we've done is we've been quite nimble since the whole tariff situation emerged last year, early April. And I would say in the last 9 to 10 months, we moved to we've accelerated the process of our bilateral agreements. I think that has come out very strongly. We've reduced the dependency that we had on US, right? And that continues to be, and obviously we're trying to still negotiate, and we're yet to see what happens on the US trade deal. But in the interim, a number of trade agreements have come into play. And I won't call it trade agreements because the canvas of what we termed as free trade agreements, which is largely trade-related, has now changed to economic partnership. And that spirit of partnership then has a very broad canvas. It includes aspects relating to services, digital goods, technology, mobility, sustainability, investment. So that's the new narrative that we're doing, that we are looking at it in a more holistic manner and therefore building more resilience in our supply chain by adding more diversity. Now that's happening across, as you've seen, the number of FTAs have already been signed, whether we've seen the agreement with UAE, with UK, we've seen with other parts of, and now the big mega agreement with Europe, which is on the anvil, right? And therefore the dependency, whether it's Middle East you look at, whether you look at Oceania, whether you look at parts of Europe, we are definitely diversifying our supply chain to that extent. The second thing I would say is that in order to address this whole tariff issue, I would say that we need to build resilience in our export. And that I spoke earlier of in terms of what needs to be done to address the competitiveness. And those measures that we spoke about in terms of making the custom duty structure more rational, making sort of our component manufacturing happen in India, all of that, those measures would go a long way in addressing the supply chain issue. Also, there are certain fiscal challenges that are there, especially for the MSMEs, so some of that pain can be addressed. So I think it's a combination of what we're doing in terms of posturing, as you rightly said. Posturing is that we are not exclusively dependent, we are diversifying. We're also looking at multimodal ways in which our supply chain needs to be oriented, so we're not dependent on one single channel. I mean, things are getting tough, right? Whether you look at air, land, or sea, you have to look at a combination of agility, cost, risks, because new risks are emerging in terms of shipments, etc. So you have to have a hybrid structure in terms of you channelize your shipments, etc. So all of those things are sort of work in progress, but I think we are looking at it in a multidimensional way rather than singularly.
I think the customs part, I'll come to Bipin in a moment, but before that, coming to you, Anupam, being a competitive global brand, Liberty as a brand has, transitioned from being an MSME in 1954, where probably you were manufacturing 4 pairs of shoes a day, to where you are now. What is the biggest challenge for you to make that transition, and for countless other MSMEs to make that transition, become a global player with brand and repute?
So definitely. So if you would understand, if you were touching way back in 54, India always had a stance of how to create a right balance between the socialist side and the capitalist side. And you would know footwear was reserved for small scale, and large scale was not even seen as an advantage. It was seen as a disadvantage in the earlier time. And today also, I think there are a lot of policies whereby the real large scale is not really seen as a very positive economy. So I think supporting the large scale manufacturing is something which will make us globally competitive. And I think how do we support the larger? And the moment the larger support happens, suddenly the socialist side of it wakes up and suddenly says, no, why are we putting all the eggs in the same basket? So I think that right balance needs to be approached. I may like to say that I support the capitalist side, whereby if the manufacturing or the Indian competitiveness needs to be seen more positively, then the capitalist approach slightly has to be seen in the short-term perspective, while I want to see the human side and the socialist side not getting compromised. But we need to think India as a business-like country and say, we are wanting to get to the scale, and for scale we need slightly more larger setups and bigger clusters. So if you were to replicate models like a China model, so the factories are as large as they are like the towns and countries in itself, and that's how they are able to bring the whole ecosystem together and the costing down. Individually, it becomes very difficult. And the second thing, which I was talking about, the consumption, how does India as a whole support other countries? Say, for example, how do we create a India infra in, let's say for example, Africa, whereby the logistics support, which a lot of small players can't really independently do it, or the marketing support, which we can't really do it. How do we create an ecosystem so that country or an industry as a whole is represented there for some of the competitive edge sectors which we are wanting to develop? All individuals, if they approach on the marketing side or the consumption side, is always more difficult. So more cohesive marketing to drive consumption domestically or internationally are initiatives which we should look at. So while we support a lot of incentives in manufacturing, but how do we go together as Made in India brand to different parts of the world and increase Indian product consumption, probably will bring a lot of good scale. And the other challenge is always the infrastructure and the logistics, which, how does it connect for small quantities, because the moment you go to the small countries, their consumptions may not be so. So some kind of a trade hub needs to be created there, so that, and I think China has done it beautifully, how they created their trade centers and within economies. And I think initiatives have to be taken to increase consumption and not just focus within India to focus on manufacturing.
Right. Bipin, coming back to, the customs part of it, customs and trade competitiveness, they are, related. We still see, customs filing, compliance is still time consuming and tedious. What are the key pain points that businesses face today that budget can take into account? You have the faceless assessment scheme, you have the Turant scheme as well. How well are they working?
I think customs is one area which will be the focus when it comes to this budget. The finance minister has talked about it. While rates are going to be a major part of how they look at rationalization in terms of what needs to be pushed for manufacture, because ultimately being part of the global value chain is what is very key, and what is being imported in India for manufacturing in India, which is going to be manufactured for the world, is very key to the whole customs thing. It's no longer that all components should be at, say, 2.5%, or the final product should be at 7% or 10%, whatever the numbers are. It needs to be looked at a sector. EVs, for one, are at 5% GST today. They are being incentivized, but their components, when they are being imported, are and the thought is that the components have to be manufactured in India. But till they start getting manufactured, the catch-22 is that it's increasing the cost of having a higher rate of customs on the battery, on other products which make an EV. So sector-wise rationalization needs to be looked at. On the procedural part, I think Turant and other schemes have played a very important role in streamlining how customs does it. I think what GST has brought into the fold is an expectation that automation can play a major role in terms of filing, in terms of compliances, and that needs to be brought to the customs part. In terms of being able to, for wholesale filings, the use of APIs, which is there in GST, needs to be brought into customs, and there is an effort which is being done to do that. That side of automation is very key in terms of from a perspective of ease of filing and getting the goods out of the custom zone as quickly as possible. The other thing is the average time taken by goods to be cleared from customs. That's still very high in India. The turnaround time needs to be much faster. You look at other economies and even if we compare it with China, the turnaround times are phenomenally lower there for various reasons, and there can be various things which can be done to really streamline that. There are other schemes which are there where India has done a lot to incentivize ease of import, where you are using it for schemes like Mover, which is inbound manufacture, or SEZs and other things. And there are a lot of things which need to be done for those also to really streamline quick customs import. But from a process perspective, things like rules of origin and how goods are looked at when they are being imported into the country, what all needs to be checked. The AEO system which has been there in the country, a lot of that also needs to be really streamlined, and a lot of studies have been done so that at least the compliant companies really have an edge. They have an edge today, but not as much as the industry would want to be. So a whole lot of streamlining, and I think this is the year when we will see those changes come in. That is the expectation of the industry from the budget, that the Finance Minister will talk about streamlining the processes, obviously, and the rates.
Right. Dilip, coming to you, automation cannot happen without the supporting infrastructure. And I want to touch about infrastructure readiness for smart manufacturing. So how critical are digital and physical infrastructure like power, connectivity, data centers for automation-led manufacturing, and how ready is India?
Yeah, that's a very important two-part answer to that. I think on both those aspects, we work in progress. You spoke about physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure. I think for manufacturing, physical infrastructure is the lifeblood, right? We've been talking about, as a nation, there's been a lot of dialogue about improving the cost of doing business. And we've seen the needle move on that, which is very encouraging. But I think we still have a long way to go to become something which is even remotely in the realm of being world-class or world competitive. And that's, the time it takes for goods to be cleared. We're just talking about exports and imports, so the dock to stock times, etc., are still, far away from what a world-class, benchmark is. But digital infrastructure, I think in many ways, India has really distinguished itself and differentiated from not just the global south, but even large-scale advanced economies in terms of being able to deploy digital technologies at population scale and then being able to get advantages out of it, right, for the masses. That has not yet extended itself into manufacturing. And when I say manufacturing, I'm not talking about things like GST, right? That of course has been a major unlock, but I'm talking about the core manufacturing itself, the process of value creation. I think over there is where the next, what we've been discussing, the next opportunity area for India lies, right? I think you spoke about, access to reliable power, Of course, very important, all of the key factors that go in terms of making manufacturing more competitive. But I would say that as we think about the next set of industrial clusters that need to be thought about and evolved, it just cannot be limited only to the common denominators of access to power. We have to think in terms of access to skills, access to digital ready infrastructure, right? Because a lot of the firms that you want to be able to attract within the clusters are going to be mid to small size firms, right? They would not have the ability to build that infrastructure by itself. You do not even want them to be experimenting, because where's the time? The time to value is getting, those timelines are getting compressed, right? So if we can take all of that piece out and integrate that within the common infrastructure of a cluster, right? I think that really goes a long way. So integrate digital infrastructure into the common facilities as you think about the next set of clusters is the way I would put it.
Naveen, coming to you, there's a quite success story which has happened, and it's a darling of the sector now. It's the GCCs. Dilip runs large GCC here. It brings high quality jobs, exports of services, innovation. So while India has emerged as a hot center for GCCs, what has worked so far? What are the gaps? And what can budget do? And should it do something about GCCs?
Budget definitely should do something about it. This has been sort of the poster boy, if I would say, in the economy right now. And let me paint the picture right now. We are about 55% of the GCCs are sitting in India, right? Large company GCCs are sitting in India. That percentage contributes 2% of the GDP and 4% of our services GDP. The numbers are close to about 1,700 to 1,800 GCCs that are there today. And those are growing at a healthy clip of about 2 GCCs every week, about 110 to 120 GCCs every year. So that number is going to grow to 21 to 2,400 GCCs. In terms of how they're growing, firstly, these GCCs are moving from tier 1 cities to tier 2 cities because the talent availability is there now in tier 2 cities. Second is what we conventionally knew as GCCs for large tech companies or BFSI companies. Now it's growing into other sectors. So we have a lot of GCCs coming into consumer, into pharma, into defense. So that change is happening from a sectoral lens. Third is what was traditionally known as GCCs largely being back office functions. Now that has moved up the value chain, right? So we're seeing high-end engineering, we're seeing analytics, AI-led modeling happening out of India. So more strategic-led functions are being done. And therefore, in that context, GCC is now not sort of isolated to certain clusters or certain geographies, but is becoming a pan-India phenomena. And therefore, one needs to now look at, which is already in play to some extent, is a national GCC framework that has already been announced. But what's really happened so far is targeted incentives being brought in by states. So it started with Karnataka coming out with the policy, then it was Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, UP, Gujarat. So many states have come out with their own GCC incentives, which are linked to capital, employment generation, payroll, and so on and so forth. But I think we now need a national umbrella under which GCCs will be, put together. And there should be, this is again an opportune time because we've largely been, this is our strength, right? So while we do focus a lot on manufacturing, but we need to capitalize on our strength. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to now incentivize companies which are looking at investing in R&D, right? R&D, we've really not been able to double down on R&D if you look at it. Our R&D spend is probably lower than most of the other countries. And therefore, this is a space where a lot of investment is happening in R&D. So we need to really incentivize companies who are looking at creating, doing R&D and creating real IP out of India. Also look at companies who are purposefully moving to tier 2, tier 3 cities. So there could be some sort of incentive package designed, looking at capital, looking at talent generation in the tier 2, tier 3 cities, looking at investment in R&D. So that could be one way of looking at it. The second is the fact that there are concerns from a tax perspective, where the tax lens, that the margins that are there for GCCs, and these are global captives. So there isn't clarity or certainty because the functions are quite common across the board, right? So there are no safe harbors for GCC. I think this is an opportune time for the government to look at introducing some sort of safe harbors under transfer pricing for GCCs. Maybe the threshold that is there currently for safe harbor can be raised to 300 crores, and a number of GCCs could come under that. Accelerate the process of an advanced pricing agreement, because many of these companies in GCCs are looking for faster resolution through APAs. That's another thing that could be done. And more importantly, as more and more larger global roles, for instance, moving into India, there's a lot of mention of that. There is concern that this could create a taxman knocking at your door and saying that the foreign company creates a taxable presence in India because some of these regional roles or global roles are sitting in India. So there is clearly some redressal or some sort of a guidance needed to address this issue on what should be the tax treatment in such kind of situations. So a comprehensive framework for looking at this, because we are not anymore a cost arbitrage. This is now a capability arbitrage that India has, and India is clearly riding the wave. So it's an opportune time to take this forward.
Yeah. Dilip, is there something that you want to add?
I completely resonate with that. The only thing that I would also say is, whereas a lot of the cost to capability shift that Naveen just alluded to, that is going to happen aided by digital technologies. And where's the talent pool that is able to harness the power of digital and apply it for those innovations at scale? That's right here. So it's unsurprising that this opportunity is coming knocking at India's doors, and we ought to be able to create the right policy framework to be able to take advantage of it.
Right. Anupam, coming to you, away from the GCCs and automation, the other part is, especially for manufacturing and especially for sectors like yours and textile, it's about sustainability and global standards. Sustainability is now a norm, and especially if you're in exports and within the country as well, you're expected to, undergo sustainable manufacturing and look at the environment. How prepared is the India's leather industry, and what can policy do, or what kind of policy support do you think is needed to move in the proper direction when it comes to sustainability?
So as for Liberty is concerned, because the outlook has always been slightly large scale and we have been part and parcel of global standards, so it doesn't come across as a big surprise that I need to follow the norms and it is increasing my cost, because a lot of these things were part and parcel of us. So I don't see that as a big challenge, while I definitely from a large perspective see that a lot of people talk about sustainability without creating the alternates being made available. So I don't want sustainability to be looked at as increased cost and who will pay for that cost. So I think sustainability should come across as a culture whereby it should not become like a fad. Say, for example, if you say this organic vegetable is more expensive than the normal vegetable, and are people making choices? So I think sustainability has to become part of the ecosystem and as a balancing factor rather than as a premium factor. So I would love everybody to be sustainable and think about the global warming or waste or plastic, rather than saying, okay, these are only very few people who are able to afford organic vegetable or sustainable footwear. So I think it's a culture. We all need to take care of our Mother Earth, take care of our environment, and be mindful of it and have solutions. Like say, for example, little moving away, we talk about Delhi pollution, but nobody is a solution to a Delhi pollution. And if we were to do something, we don't even know what else can we do. While Liberty and Anupam Bansal would like to support a sustainable economy and the environment, but the options available to us, what we can really do, look quite limited. And I think I would want government to be slightly more clear on what can be done and what cannot be done, because we keep on listening to the both sides of the story. So it's something like Delhi should have, better whatever infrastructure to reduce pollution. At the same time, you can't just talk about it and do nothing about it.
Right. Interesting. Bipin, coming to you, there has been always an over-reliance on indirect taxes, primarily because, our low collection when it comes to direct taxes, somewhere about 2% maybe. So government has historically relied more on indirect taxes for their revenue. Indirect taxes is always seen as regressive in nature because it taxes the poor and the rich almost at the same level. So do you think there is a need for budget now to look at, different ways to address this gap between indirect and direct taxes or find new ways?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would want the direct tax base to increase, definitely, so that the pressure on indirect taxes goes away. So that 2% should go to 10%. That's the easiest solution which is out there. But I think the government is seized of the matter, and indirect taxes are regressive. They do tax the poor relatively more than they tax the rich. And GST 2.0 was all about that, bringing down the rates of essential commodities from 18 or 12 down to 5%. That's what they have done, and I think it's a great step towards a much more equitable taxation. I think over the period of time, the exemptions should go away. As the base of indirect tax increases, the rates would be much more rational. And having a larger base is always good because it keeps you within the formal economy. So if you pay indirect taxes, you pay direct taxes as well. And so the two bases are quite linked. And given today's administrative and the IT infrastructure, much more correlation and much more collaboration between the two departments. And hence we see much more effective policing happening. And I think the compliances have gone up in both the sides. Having said that, so what we are looking at is on both the customs and the GST, the exemption should get streamlined over the period of time. The base of GST needs to increase. There is no doubt. We talked about petroleum. There is a whole lot of other things which are even lower hanging. Real estate is there. Electricity has been one major area which has been a major cost where the cost cascading happens. So unless and until we increase our tax to GDP, which is currently around 12% to something around closer to a 20%, we're not going to really reach a point where the reliance on indirect tax reduces. And the indirect tax itself can be made less regressive by increasing the base, both on the custom side and on the GST side. And they'll need to look at MSMEs in a much bigger way because that's where the major manufacturing happens and that's where the focus has been. And from in a direct tax perspective, from a GST perspective, and obviously from a customs perspective, if the laws can be streamlined, the compliances can be made simpler, much more participation in the formal network, and that's what we look at in this budget as much as we do in each budget. But I think this is the time when, given the geopolitics, the competitiveness of the Indian industries is being looked at very closely. I think there would be a huge, there would be much lesser reliance on the regressiveness of the indirect taxes.
Right. So that brings me to my last question, and it'll remain the same for everyone. What is that one defining ask from Budget 2026? If budget had to make one decisive intervention, what should it be? Dilip, starting with you.
I would say it is, there's been a lot of support for manufacturing. Time has come for us to switch to execution. So how can policy framework enable execution of these policies, national manufacturing mission, roadmap to advanced manufacturing at scale, right? So, and government has a lot to do with that.
Right. Naveen?
I'll make it very operational because the budget does get a little operational at time, is about last mile connectivity and logistics. Because I think it creates a bridge between what we can do in terms of export competitiveness for driving manufacturing and making India move up the value chain in terms of the global ecosystem. It will help in driving infrastructure, which is creating new markets through last mile connectivity. And in the GCC space, it will help in ensuring mobility of people, mobility of processes, and mobility of data. So I think it creates a good interlock amongst all the three themes that we spoke about, and I think that would be a good way to intersect it.
Right. Anupam, coming to you.
So I would say consistently create a feel-good factor which triggers consumption, and the moment there's a feel-good factor and an increase in consumption, I think any effort on that direction would probably trigger the good economy and keep India growing.
Right. Bipin, I'll have.
Two simple asks. One, customs we talked about. I think we need to look at the sectors and really look at which sectors to incentivize or change into a phased manufacturing program to incentivize manufacturing and competitiveness. And second, I think the Indian industry is looking at the carbon the carbon credits, the carbon taxes which are out there. They need to they need to be streamlined so that there need to be a much more formal structure in place and clarity as to how that will move, because the global supply chains are getting impacted by all of that, and there needs to be a clarity, and I think this budget would talk about that.
Great. I think that's a good point to end this discussion. From manufacturing, finance, technology and exports, the message is clear that India's next phase of growth will depend on lower friction, faster execution and predictable policy. Reducing costs, strengthening supply chains and enabling scale, and also improving access to capital are no longer just sector-specific issues. They are economy-wide priorities. Thank you to all our speakers for this wonderful insight and for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.